The Monsters That Made Us is brought to you by the Cage Club Podcast Network. For all things movies, music, media, monsters, and more, head on over to cageclub.me. That's cageclub.me. Today we head back to Transylvania in the 15th century where Vlad Dracula, the Prince of Wallachia, has been ruling his territory in peace for a decade after years of fighting with the Ottoman Empire's elite Janissary Corps and establishing his reputation as Vlad the Impaler, son of the dragon. But when Sultan Mehmed II calls on Vlad to provide a tribute of 1,000 boys, including his own son, to serve as soldiers, Vlad stops at nothing to protect his family and free his people from the long arm of the Sultan, including seeking the aid of a mysterious, inhuman creature lurking in the dark recesses of the nearby Broken Tooth Mountain. Now armed with all of the supernatural abilities of a creature of the night, Vlad once again finds himself embracing the monster within to defeat his enemies, but this time he must also resist the overwhelming urge to consume human blood for 3 days or else stay a monster forever. Break out your silver and join us as we discuss Dracula Untold.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
Listen to them. Children of the night.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? I'll show you who I am and what I am.
You're insane. I tell you, I killed a wolf, a plain, ordinary wolf.
By studying these and other species, we add to our knowledge of how life evolved, how it adapted itself to this world.
He went for a little walk. He could have seen his face.
Welcome to the return of The Monsters That Made Us, the podcast where we celebrate the spooktacular characters and films in the Universal Studios Classic Monsters series. Today, we're talking about Universal's 2014 origin story, Dracula Untold. I'm the Invisible Dan Colon, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, our very own Master Vampire himself, Monster Mike Manzi. How are you, Mike?
Dan, we can't stop here. This is Bat Country.
Oh man, it is Bat Country. Okay, so just to recap a little bit, we're like halfway through this quote-unquote season. So Universal has a massively successful Mummy trilogy under their belt. They're currently cranking out more straight-to-DVD Scorpion King movies, and their recent attempts to resurrect the other characters in their classic Monsters canon have fallen pretty flat, at least as far as the box office is concerned. Here we are with our third Dracula in this second wave of Universal Monsters. I'm just now realizing that we have 6 total Draculas this season, and this time Universal decides to go all the way back to the beginning for Dracula's origin story, which we've never seen on this podcast until now. Although this is going to come up later, I'm sure, but Mike, you and I, and I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with the sort of truncated version of this story in Francis Ford Coppola's film Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yes.
Both draw pretty exclusively from the Vlad the Impaler mythology. There's a lot of similarities between the two, and it's probably unavoidable. Now, just for some context, outside of Universal at this time, we're in the second phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Christopher Nolan has just recently wrapped up his Dark Knight trilogy. And so this sort of origin story, almost a superhero origin story, is a very popular thing at the time. So I guess the thinking was that why not build a big monster franchise starting with Dracula, much in the same way that Marvel did with their superheroes, starting with Iron Man and building the whole universe. Now, in our last episode, I mentioned that my memory of Dracula Untold was that it was originally meant to kick off a shared monster universe, which, as we know, sort of became the Dark Universe. That sort of turned out, in my research, to be not altogether inaccurate. It's not quite as cut and dry as that, but we'll get to that at some point. But for now, let's talk about Dracula Untold. Mike, have you seen it before? What are your thoughts on Dracula Untold? Just sort of your general impression of this movie.
So I'd seen it once before. At the time, it left such a small impression on me that I did not even remember the flock of bats that he turns into. It's like, surely now after watching it this time, how could you forget? Well, I'll have much to say later on. I'll just cut to the chase. Watching it this time, I actually, for what it is, maybe it's the Scorpion King trilogy is talking, but I enjoyed it. Like, there's a lot of strong stuff in here. There's just like a few tweaks I would have made that could have made this go even further for me. There's a lot of cool stuff happening. I'm just not sure about the way it's happening or presented. We were talking a little before how kind of straightforward this film is. It's very short. Like, I very much appreciate that. I think that is one of the things it does well. There's not very much to tell, and they find a way to like do it right in that sense. Like, I think like the conflict and stuff is kind of cool and interesting, and the politics of what he's involved in and his image and all that kind of stuff.
I agree. I really enjoy this movie. The first time I saw it, I really enjoyed it. I definitely got like a Hammer vibe from it, at least from a production design standpoint. I think the use of the color red is very intentional. It sort of draws from a lot of the superhero origin stories that were happening at the time. And I think that works okay here. It's definitely bringing some new stuff to the table that we haven't seen in a Dracula movie. I think I've mentioned on this show before that I really like vampire shit. Like when a movie will do a vampire movie, whether it's Dracula or otherwise, and they show me like what a vampire is capable of with their superhuman abilities. And I saw stuff in this movie that I had never seen anywhere else. The flock of bat sequences were in the trailer. That's the selling point, right? Like the big fist of bats that he brings down on the army is so impressive. Even though I saw it in the trailer, seeing it happen in the context of the story, I'm wowed by that. That and the scene which is commonly referred to as Vlad versus 1,000, when he just walks out into the opposing army and like is fighting as a man, but then is also turning into this swarm of bats. That sequence is really well orchestrated. There's some really cool vampire stuff in here. Is this the same Dracula that would go on to be Bela Lugosi? I don't think so.
Probably not.
But it does fit the idea of Dracula that we have, especially when we think of Vlad the Impaler. I mean, this is the literal one-to-one comparison here. I think this is a great movie. It's a lot of fun. It doesn't overstay its welcome. I think the 90-minute runtime is perfect. I saw like a Letterboxd review as I was preparing for the episode, and somebody I follow was like, it's not long enough to suck.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Like, it just in and out, doesn't overstay its welcome. It's interesting, though, within the context of when this came out, there is certainly a superheroification of Dracula.
Yeah.
In my mind, Luke Evans is basically doing a Wolverine in this movie.
Sure.
He's got the healing factor and all that kind of crap going on. He's got the bad attitude. He's the anti-hero Dracula in this. He's not even Dracula until the end, right? Like, I kind of like that, too, about it, is how there is kind of an arc. At first, this boy was stolen from his family and forced to fight and became like the baddest badass soldier that he was given land. But then like later it's taken, everything's taken. He has to do all this like horrible stuff to get it back. And then he's like, no, I've earned the right to be called like the devil's son. And so he changes his name to Dracula. They call him Vlad the whole time. So like, it's not bad within the realm of all that. It just feels like it probably got lost in the shuffle because of all the other stuff going on with superheroes at the time. And B, we rarely ever do get sort of a retelling of his origins. We'll get deeper into the film when we get to the film, but for the most part, it succeeds in what it's trying to deliver. I just wonder if it was like timed wrong upon release. Maybe it's because now I can sort of identify it or compare it way more to superhero type of stuff, and that it's such more of a genre that I'm like, oh, looking at this, it's like, this is how you kind of do that right. There's no superfluous diversions, and like they're not really setting up a whole lot of other stuff here, and there's only like one dangling thread, and all in all, I thought it was pretty successful.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page with this one for sure. Let's get into this. I don't have a ton of notes, but I did find out some interesting stuff about this production. Dracula Untold was released in 2014, but the genesis of this film occurred way back in 2007, which was between the release of Van Helsing and The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. Universal approached The Crow and Dark City director Alex Proyas to direct the project, known at the time as Dracula Year Zero. Producer Michael DeLuca, who was the president of production of New Line Cinema through the back half of the 90s, was also attached. In 2010, Australian actor Sam Worthington officially signed on to star.
As Dracula, huh?
As Dracula. But ultimately in 2012, the project fell apart when Universal ended the deal with Alex Proyas due to a high budget, causing Sam Worthington to also back out of the project altogether and then eventually be replaced by Luke Evans the following year. With Alex Proyas gone, Universal hired Irish director Gary Shore, who up to this point had only ever made short films, one of which resulted in a deal with Working Title Films to develop a still yet unproduced feature-length version. So this was his feature film debut.
Wow, that is crazy. Your first movie out of the gate is a giant Hollywood summer type blockbuster.
Yeah, a tentpole which could have started a franchise.
Reimagining one of the most famous fictional characters in history. And it's like, here you go, Gary Shore. Sure, why not?
When developing Dracula Untold, Shore drew from a lot of different sources for inspiration. Most notably, according to him on the director commentary for the Blu-ray, he drew from Close Encounters of the Third Kind when handling all the Broken Tooth Mountain stuff, Predator with the vampires sort of echolocation, like
Definitely.
heartbeat vision,
Certainly.
which I wrote down before I even listened to him talk about it. I'm like, this is straight Predator. And also Westerns, specifically Once Upon a Time in the West.
Okay.
But mostly he aimed to incorporate the old Gothic sensibilities from the past.
There's also, if I may interject quickly, but whether he realizes it or not, it could be my reading. There's a lot of like Jesus stuff with this guy.
Sure. In the years since, Shore has directed the St. Patrick's Day segment of the 2015 anthology film Holidays, the 2023 horror film Haunting of the Queen Mary, as well as commercials for Game of War, Fire Age, Gatorade, Adidas, and UGG. Dracula Untold was not the launching point for his career.
I got to say this up front about the director. Not his fault if this failed, because you could feel, at least I can, Dan, I don't know about you, but it seemed like there were notes all over this thing that he was just trying to please a lot of people. And I think that might not be true. A couple sequences, I feel it might be true with like the bats and the silver at times and things. But he did the best he could under the circumstances. Finding out that this is his first feature film, like, I got to give it to him for sure. You know, if I was Kevin Feige and I watched this and I was like, who directed this? Well, like, what hack put this together? And they're like, wait, this is a first time guy? Like, give me his number.
I agree. I don't think the problems with this movie are his fault really at all.
Yeah, because like there's drama that gets like deep and slow, right? And like he tries to find the time to pace that out properly. And then there's action that is just like pretty badass and balls to the wall.
Yes.
And it's not annoying at all, right? We've seen and witnessed a lot of annoying fights along the way. And these they were not. So
the screenplay was written by writing team Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless. Prior to Dracula Untold, Sazama and Sharpless spent a couple of years developing unproduced scripts for a Sony Pictures Flash Gordon film, a 20th Century Fox Missile Command adaptation, and a Universal film based on the board game Clue.
Whoa, a remake?
And I don't know that it was a remake of Clue, but I remember years ago hearing about like the studios kind of putting together board game adaptations. Monopoly.
Battleship came out.
Battleship did come out, yep.
Right.
So I think Clue is part of that.
Yeah, I think Hasbro was trying to find more success after Transformers. So like, can we make a Checkers movie and get away with it?
Following the success of Dracula Untold, the two wrote 2015's The Last Witch Hunter, followed by the box office bombs Gods of Egypt, Power Rangers, Morbius, and Madam Web.
Okay, we have to maybe take this one by one. Witch Hunter, not bad, has that Vin Diesel in it. Luke Evans and Vin Diesel, they were together in some Fast and Furious flicks.
Yep.
It's definitely Morbin time in this movie from time to time. Like, it's nuts. I could see parallels for sure. In fact, parts of Morbius feel like they might have been left over from a sequel to this.
Yeah, I could see that.
Do they not? Yeah. Madam Web, I mean, I don't want to touch that yet. I think it's too fresh. I might have left one out, but we can proceed.
In 2015, Disney hired them to write a live-action adaptation of the Night on Bald Mountain segment of Fantasia.
Whoa, speaking of Dracula, didn't Bella pose as the demon in that sequence?
Yes. So more Dracula connection there. So that project still hasn't gotten off the ground. As of this recording, July 2024, that project is still in development. I don't have a whole lot to say about the production. I couldn't really find anything interesting except that shooting began in Northern Ireland on August 5th, 2013 and lasted until November. They shot a lot of this film up in Northern Ireland, like near Belfast and whatnot.
It's got a pretty big feel to it. You know, it's definitely not VOD style, right? This is definitely theatrical. Okay. So like, I feel the scope. I also like the just general kind of style they put on this. Like there's somewhere between like 300 and Rings of Power going on with like the alteration of the skies and all that kind of stuff. I think it works pretty well.
Some of the production design in this is really fantastic. I may as well mention this now, but I sort of touched on Bram Stoker's Dracula earlier. This film and that film share an illustrator. Mauro Borelli, he was an illustrator that worked on Bram Stoker's Dracula. For that film, he designed Dracula's castle.
Like the sitting on a throne look.
Yeah, and then here he designed all of the illustrations in the sequence where Dracula is learning about what a vampire is towards the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
When the
In the library.
Yes. So he did all of those illustrations. So I love that there's a direct connection from Bram Stoker's Dracula film and Dracula Untold. So that's pretty cool.
And his armor kind of at times reminded me of the armor.
I thought the same. If Francis Ford Coppola had not been so influenced by or so inspired by those paintings, I forget the artist, but he was inspired by specific paintings from that artist to create the general look of that film, then yeah, I feel like the Dracula armor could have more closely resembled what we see here in this film. So, okay, let's get into the shared universe thing. I want to touch on that before we get into the cast.
Sure.
A week before the film's release, rumors began to spread that reshoots took place toward the end of shooting to establish a foundation for a shared cinematic universe. Now, these are just rumors that showed up in the tabloids. According to Gary Shore, yes, reshoots did take place so that they could include the epilogue at the studio's request.
Let the games begin.
Yes. Now, Universal later denied that Dracula Untold was ever intended to be the start of a shared universe, although executive producer Alyssa Phillips had expressed hope that Vlad might appear in a future Mummy movie, and also mentioned a possible sequel to Dracula Untold. Ultimately, though, if Universal actually did intend to kick off a major shared universe with Dracula, those plans were ultimately scrapped when they positioned 2017's The Mummy as the true start of their dark universe.
Okay.
So it's a little bit fuzzy. I kind of want to believe that this was supposed to be the beginning.
It's weird because from what I had heard, combined with what you were talking about a little earlier about when this started production, this totally could have fit into the Brendan Fraser verse. Or, I mean, even, I don't know so much about Hugh Jackman stuff, but like they could have done a sequel where this Dracula runs into Brendan Fraser's family or his son or something like that. Like, I feel like there is enough, it's close enough, or it's close enough for them to take it off and do whatever they want with it. Now, I don't remember hearing at the time any rumors that like the Invisible Man was going to show up or anything like that. But I do remember hearing that after The Mummy came out and the Dark Universe was like, here we are, and they released the photo and all that kind of stuff. I don't remember Luke Evans in the photo, but I remember something about saying like, well, retroactively, that's going to count. We're going to count it because it's already kind of there. And if we want it, we'll use it. And like Charles Dance is like great to have in the pocket. So I guess that's not true either. It is kind of weird how it's almost like the DC EU kind of, it's like a false start in a way where they like trip and stop. And then this, just became nothing after one movie.
What's weird to me is that this movie wasn't a box office failure, and why they stopped at one, I just don't know. I think maybe once they decided that the Dark Universe was going to be the direction for these characters, they were just going to let this be a one-off and just move on from it.
But it makes even less sense because you've already got groundwork.
Yeah.
That's what's wild to me. And it's like, now you're going to recast Dracula again. It's like Luke Evans is good enough to go toe to toe with Tom Cruise. He could be a little more handsome to be Dracula, I suppose, but grow a goatee.
My partner may disagree with you there, Mike, but
I'm sure many people disagree with me. It's just personal tastes, I suppose. But
I especially agree with your point that this could be in the same universe as The Mummy, and that Brendan Fraser could face off against this Dracula, because this movie also draws from action movies really more than most other things, right? Like it is at the end of the day an action movie, not a horror movie.
So that's kind of interesting too. That sets it apart from most Dracula. Like you could imagine that after this big battle that he did, he was done fighting. So he just kind of was more stealth and one by, just picked people off or whatever he would do. So, it's like, when did he kick ass? Like, show us that. When was he young and like running around the battlefield, like impaling dudes left and right?
This movie sort of falls apart on me at the end. How do we get from where this story ends to the Dracula that is leaving Europe to feed on England, right? To prey on the people of England. I can't really reconcile those two ideas. So he doesn't really feel like Dracula in that way. I think the movie doesn't really establish him as a villain. They're kind of going more in the Bram Stoker sort of romantic anti-hero angle.
This is the origin. He doesn't have those tendencies until the end of the movie where he's like, now you may call me Dracula. And then we don't know what was going to happen, but I would assume that let the games begin kind of means like Dracula may not be a bad dude, but he's going to be characterized as a
Sure.
bad guy for all the deeds he's about to do. And it's going to be up to the other monsters to kind of rally together to stop him. And it's going to be sort of like a big misunderstanding moment or something at some point. And it's all
Right.
going to be like, no, it's actually like Charles Dance, who's like the Nosferatu guy.
Right.
Like it's him. I think they jumped too far in the future. I think that was another problem with that. It's like
Sure.
we never find out what happened to the son of Dracula.
Right. Well, he grows a mustache and he moves to New Orleans. That's what we know. And he drives a car.
Well, no, he gets
He gets
to sit shotgun.
He rides in the car. That's right.
Yeah, with no dignity.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever know for sure, but that's the version I choose to believe, that this was supposed to be the start, and then somebody had this dramatically different idea that this didn't fit with, so they just decided to abandon it and start the Dark Universe with the Mummy.
What a crazy time that was, Dan. With everybody trying to copy Marvel and DC just wrapping up that super successful Batman stuff, and it's just like, what's gonna happen? I mean, could you imagine being Universal being like, we've got this golden ticket of properties and IPs and all this, like we can't screw this up. Oh shit! Like, no, one false move and we did it.
Yeah, well, we will definitely get to that because the Mummy is coming up soon in a couple episodes, so I can't wait to talk about that. But let's get into the cast now. There's a lot of actors in this cast. I decided for the sake of time that we would just talk about the principal cast here, the top like 5 or 6 characters. If some of the supporting cast sticks out to you, please by all means bring them up. So we're going to start with Luke Evans, of course, as our Vlad the Impaler Dracula. Luke Evans is a Welsh actor and he's a singer, which I didn't know, and he began training as a singer in his late teens, and he debuted on stage in 2000, appearing in many West End productions, including Rent, Miss Saigon, and Avenue Q.
Wow, all right.
He had his first film audition at the age of 30 and made his film debut as Apollo in the 2010 remake Clash of the Titans.
All right. I'm starting to look through his stuff. I recognize him a little more. I'm a little unsettled that we're the same age.
So that same year, he played the Sheriff of Nottingham's thug in Ridley Scott's Robin Hood. He also worked with Paul W.S. Anderson playing Aramis in The Three Musketeers. He also worked with Peter Jackson playing Bard the Bowman in the Hobbit trilogy, which he's perfect for The Hobbit or some Middle-earth stuff. He looks kind of like a dark-haired Orlando Bloom to me, like that sort of type. He was the villain in Fast and Furious 6, after which Universal execs approached him to discuss future roles, and that is what led to him playing Dracula.
Oh, okay.
Since Dracula, he's kept pretty busy, appearing in some high-profile projects on both the big and small screens, and he has released 2 studio albums, one in 2019 and the other in 2022, which you gotta check them out.
Might not get Luke Evans on the horn, but maybe we should review one of his records.
Would be great. I listened to a couple of his songs, and he does a killer Cher cover on his first album.
I love Cher.
He does a cover of If I Could Turn Back Time, and it's absolutely great. Dominic Cooper plays Sultan Mehmed II.
All right.
Cooper is an English actor originally from Greenwich. He's a graduate of the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. His acting career began on the big and small screen in 2001 when he appeared in a couple of TV movies and miniseries, as well as From Hell, where he played Constable Number 3.
Okay.
Which now I got to rewatch it and find him. Constable Number 3. He made his stage debut at the National Theatre, where he appeared in a number of plays, including The History Boys with James Corden and His Dark Materials. He's since become a relatively big star, appearing in a number of high-profile projects, but we, of course, know him best as Howard Stark in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and as Jesse Custer in the Preacher TV series.
Yes, the first of, I think, like 3 Howard Starks, maybe, or the second. I don't know, but there's a lot of Howard Starks. He's a good one.
It's him and John Slattery from Mad Men, I believe.
But then I think they used photos in the first movie of another actor. It could even be like Howard Hughes. So, like, I don't remember him in this movie, but an amazing movie is Starter for 10 with McAvoy. That's a fantastic, like, he's in so many good movies that I'm looking through, but I obviously know him from Captain America. And yeah, like the Preacher series was freaking nuts.
He's great in Preacher.
Wait, he's an Abraham Lincoln vampire hunter. Oh man, I wish I could talk to this guy. Like, that movie is unhinged fun. I think he plays a vampire in that. It's kind of weird, Dan, that we're back in this situation where we have, like, I'm assuming is Dominic Cooper, he's British, and Luke Evans British, but like I guess we're in like northwestern Europe, so they kind of fit the bill. But why does Dominic Cooper have like this harsh tan the entire
Because he's
movie?
Turkish.
It's a little strange. Like I'm not sure he's got like a very modern haircut. He's the only guy in this that really stuck out to me to be like, I like this guy, but like I don't know. He plays a great villain. Maybe
Yeah.
that's what pushed them over the edge. He feels like they just plucked him off the stage at the West End and was like, here, like go and be in this movie.
Yeah, I like his performance here, but you're right. Like he's not Turkish to my knowledge. And the eyeliner and the tan really kind of throw me a little bit. It's not the worst example of this. He was also in The Devil's Double where he played Saddam Hussein's son.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not trying to fault him or anything like that. I was only saying is that like they're not really trying to do much with anybody else's appearance, right? Like I guess Luke Evans is gaunt and pale because of the blood thing going on with him, but it's just like at least give him a period appropriate haircut.
So we've got Sarah Gadon as Marina. Now, she is a Canadian actor who originally began training as a ballet dancer as a child. She first started acting at the age of 11, appearing in an episode of La Femme Nikita, and has since racked up a number of TV credits, including Are You Afraid of the Dark and Mutant X, which we mentioned also featured Victor Webster, our new Scorpion King. And she was also in a whole slew of TV movies. She's developed something of a close relationship with the Cronenberg family, oddly enough.
Oh.
She appeared in 3 David Cronenberg films, Cosmopolis, A Dangerous Method, and Maps to the Stars. And she directed an episode of the Canadian documentary series Real Side about her collaborative relationship with the photographer Caitlin Cronenberg. That was totally new information for me. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, Cronenberg's also a famous Canadian filmmaking
Yep.
family. Very cool.
I think I know her best from her recurring role in this 3rd season of True Detective. She was that reporter in season 3.
Yeah, I was actually just having a hard time placing her. I thought at times she was Rosamund Pike. Honest mistake there, just like really beautiful blonde lady. But yeah, she would turn around from time to time and I'm like, World's End? She looking for James Bond? She's totally cool in this. Like I think that she is a very good performance. You know, she basically only gets to, well, I guess it's also period appropriate to a degree where like she is very motherly and it's all about like protecting her child and you know, she gets like Gwen Stacy'd at one point. I don't want to quite say fridged because it happens later in the movie, so it's more of a Gwen Stacy thing. For the role that it is, I thought that she was good in it.
One thing I will say about the character that I really liked, the moment when she discovers the truth about Vlad, she doesn't treat him like a monster. In fact, she defends him as much as she can, especially later on when his own people are turning on him. So I like that her character was written as a slightly more than damsel in distress. You know, she gets a little bit of agency there to work with. It's not much, admittedly, but I think she does a really great job with the material she's given.
Yeah, it's too bad because like, what's to stop them from just writing a moment where like she picks up the dude's sword who got slain protecting her and just like holds it up, you know, right before Dracula comes to save her. It's like, just give us a moment.
Art Parkinson plays Ingress. He is an Irish actor who began his career in 2008. He doesn't have a ton of credits, still pretty young, but in addition to Dracula Untold, he also appeared with The Rock in 2015's San Andreas.
That's where I knew him from. It was killing me. He's great in that movie, actually.
But more than that, I think most people probably recognize him as Rickon Stark from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I was off my game. I was like, where do I know this kid?
I definitely clocked him as Rickon Stark.
Okay. All right. I was thinking San Andreas for sure. I was like, it was a big movie. It was like a newish movie.
Speaking of Game of Thrones, Charles Dance is the master vampire. We could go on about Charles Dance.
I can't believe he didn't have a line going, would you like to dance with the devil?
Would have been great. If anybody could deliver that line in a good way, that would be him. So he's got too long of a career to really cover. I'll do some of the greatest hits here. So he was originally a Shakespearean actor with the Royal Shakespeare Company through the late 70s. He made his feature film debut as the henchman Klaus in 1981's For Your Eyes Only.
No shit.
And more than that, he apparently turned down an opportunity to screen test for the James Bond role.
Really? That's too bad because from everything I understand, his profile fits James Bond better than most of the guys we eventually got, right?
Yeah.
Like James Bond was supposed to be a little less I don't want to say attractive because he's still dashing and all that kind of stuff, but just like leaner. Yeah, like David Niven's kind of more intellectual.
Yeah, David Nivens was in Casino Royale, the original Casino Royale. I struggled to envision Charles Dance as James Bond now because of how closely we associate him with villain roles. And now I want to rewatch For Your Eyes Only just to see what he looked like in 1981. Yeah, I think that's pretty awesome that he had the opportunity to screen test and chose not to.
It's like James Bond, a ginger. Can't you imagine?
People would have lost their minds in the 80s. I mean, they couldn't handle Daniel Craig.
That's a blondie, yeah. I most remembered him originally. The thing I knew him from very much kind of seared into my brain as the ultimate hitman was Last Action Hero.
Yes.
As the one-eyed assassin guy. Like that guy walked on screen and I was like, oh my God. Like even at the time I was like, this guy's got presence, whatever that means.
Yeah, that might be the singular role of his that I just associate with him always.
I didn't even realize this, but it goes even further back. But he plays the devil in The Golden Child. He is Saro Numspot. Like I grew up with that movie. I didn't even realize that was him.
So he turned down the screen test for James Bond, but he did play Ian Fleming in a televised biography of the author called Goldeneye.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah.
I got to track that down.
He spent much of his career doing British TV dramas, although he's got plenty of noteworthy movie credits, including Alien 3, Last Action Hero, as we mentioned, Gosford Park, the Underworld films, more recently Godzilla King of the Monsters, and so on. But as I mentioned, he's a Game of Thrones actor. He was, of course, the great Tywin Lannister. Perfect role for him. I was reading the books, and I'm like, I see Charles Dance in my mind.
Great death. Great on-screen death. One of my favorite on-screen deaths.
Yeah,
that show has one of my favorite on-screen deaths and my least favorite on-screen death ever with Pedro Pascal.
Should say spoiler alerts for Game of Thrones.
It's been years.
It's been years at this point. So
this ain't no like red wedding reveal or anything.
Right. So that's it for like the principal cast. There's a whole bunch of other actors we could talk about. I do want to highlight Paul Kaye, who plays Brother Lucian. He also was a Game of Thrones actor. He was Thoros of Myr, the Red Priest.
My favorite group, the Merry Men. I love those dudes. I wish they did a whole spin-off with those characters.
Yes, I was a big fan of the Brotherhood Without Banners, and they're especially great in the books. So there's two roles that were cut out. I don't know if they were shot and cut out or if they were cut out before any shooting had happened, but they were definitely cast.
Okay.
Samantha Barks, who was Eponine in the more recent Les Miserables film, she was cast as Baba Yaga.
No way.
Yes.
No way. There it is.
She was going to play John Wick. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, right. She's gonna be in the chicken leg house and everything, and like, oh man, where would he have gone to her instead of Fangtooth Mountain?
Possibly,
bro. That's I don't know, because that feels like setting up some Nick Fury shit where it's like, you know, his handler is Baba Yaga and all this, but I don't mind that. Like that's wild.
Yeah, definitely really cool. And then so this gets into the origin of the Master Vampire. Originally, the Master Vampire was going to be Caligula, who made the deal.
No, stop.
Yeah.
No, don't like that. Don't like that. No. Although, could you imagine an Avengers style team up in 2020 with all of the Universal monsters fighting an overpowered Caligula? Like he's got all of their powers. They got to go at it in like Times Square.
So that role would have been played by Charlie Cox, Daredevil.
No way, dude. Like I ultimately don't approve, but like that is some wild thinking.
Yes.
Caligula, like to tie it to history in any way, like make it Mark Antony or something, like a little more kind of like somebody who could have been redeemed or something.
I think I agree with the decision to eliminate that part of it. I don't think the Master Vampire needed to be anybody recognizable. It doesn't matter where he comes from.
I like his origin.
Yeah.
I like this idea of this actually really gel with the thing. We'll talk about it more at the scene when the scene comes up. I mean, he's got motivation. It's enough. I don't need to know his name. I mean, you know,
it doesn't matter. If we're to establish that character as being Caligula, it makes the universe feel smaller, right? Like this this Master Vampire could be anybody.
Dude, this guy's been in there forever. He forgot his name.
Yeah.
It's like that kind of situation.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm not going to be able to get over that Caligula. What would have been even crazier is if Malcolm McDowell played him.
Oh, yeah.
Because he played Caligula in the movie. So they get the old, and he's still doing it. He would have been a great vampire actor.
I feel like, I mean, I have nothing to back this up, but I could imagine them trying to go with that angle and then casting Malcolm McDowell as the master vampire, you know, and then having Charlie Cox play young Caligula or something like that. But yeah, I'm glad that they didn't go that way. Although I feel like not having Baba Yaga in this movie is a little bit of a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessary because this movie, we're going to talk about it, it's very efficient with its time, and it might have lengthened it in a way that it didn't need to be. Yeah, I would have loved to have seen what they would have done with that character.
Thinking about it now, like it's way more streamlined in this direction. If she were in fact going to sort of sub for some kind of like gypsies we've had in the past or anything like that kind of thing, like I don't know. I like how it's all clear cut. It's all just very well contained within vampire lore.
That's it for our cast. Let's get into the movie now.
All righty.
All right, we start in 1442. We get like a prologue that establishes Vlad before the story proper begins. This is where we get all of the Vlad the Impaler stuff. So in 1442, Transylvania was part of the Ottoman Empire, and the Turkish Sultan enslaved 1,000 of the Transylvanian boys, including Vlad, and trained them to fight for their armies. And this effectively created the Impaler.
Yes.
Vlad was such a proficient warrior for the Ottoman Empire that, you know, he developed this reputation. He was impaling his enemies. Eventually was so sickened by his acts during the war that he returned to Transylvania and vowed to rule in peace, like put all of that behind him.
Yeah. It's kind of wild. He fought with them for a long time.
Yeah.
And like kind of became like this Moses guy in a way, where it's like he got close with the royal family. Like him and Dominic Cooper, we find out like they became like bros, like they became brothers, you know. And he's like, you are, you know, the greatest warrior, but you are also family, and like all that kind of stuff, and set him up after the war because he was the greatest, with land and a castle.
We don't get any explicit details, right? A lot of it's all through context, but
yeah.
I very much felt like it was like the Prince of Egypt story, you know, from the Ten Commandments. Was it Ramses and Moses were brought up as brothers, and clearly Moses was the favored one. I think Mehmed II has a chip on his shoulder. That's certainly how Dominic Cooper plays it. Like he was the favorite, and he would have inherited the kingdom if not for him being from Transylvania and Wallachia.
He's gonna let like this slave boy take his heritage and everything and all that, but it is a really kind of fun montage-esque sequence in the beginning. Like the camera's kind of whipping around and it lands on Luke Evans, like impaling a dude through the heart. And I'm really glad they went in that direction and not like the classic traditional position, from what I understand. The rear end.
Yes,
we see it once or twice in the movie. The entire battlefield just like looks like scarecrows, and, you know, it's just crazy. And it's like, he did all that.
I've gone down that rabbit hole of the impalement wiki.
Oh, don't do that.
Don't do that. You know, if you're listening to this show, don't do that.
We like our horror to be kind of fake and on screen and in movies, and not real and on the internets. And
the reality of impalement is too horrific for me.
Plus, how this ties into stakes through the heart is pretty clever. Like, I don't know how intentional that was, or if it was just a lucky accident.
It could have been, it could have been a happy accident. I'm not entirely sure, but this whole prologue, rather, is narrated by his son's perspective.
Son of Dracula.
The son of Dracula, Ingress. Yeah, so Ingress is kind of our perspective character, right? We're going to see this story play out through his eyes, more or less. Now, with the prologue over, we open up on our first scene. It's kind of like a detective's movie, right? Like,
yeah, I like this.
Vlad and his men are out in the woods, and they find this Turkish helmet just sitting in the stream.
Well, don't they find the whole soldier? It's like a whole dead soldier.
No, I think they just find the helmet.
Okay, all right.
They find evidence of Turkish presence in their land.
It's like, this is the border patrol, and they're like, we found something you might want to check out. And it becomes like this procedural for a minute.
We basically understand that a Turkish presence in Transylvania would be a declaration of war, more or less. Even though they're sort of under the umbrella of the Ottoman Empire, they are still allowed to operate more or less with autonomy, right? Like it's still Vlad's kingdom.
Yeah, but if one were to come back dead or missing,
Sure.
then like that's trouble. You know, it's
Right.
like you can't just go around killing these guys, even if it is your land, because they rule over you.
Right. So they suspect that there are Turkish forces in their territory, possibly hiding up in Broken Tooth Mountain. Vlad and a couple of his men head up there into the cave, expecting to find Turkish soldiers. But what they find is something much more horrific.
Yeah, I like how they were like, I didn't kill this guy. Like, I didn't even see this guy. Like, I don't know where this guy came from. And Vlad's like, you know, it's cool. He washed downstream from Fangtooth Mountain and like, the thunder and all that kind of thing. And I was like, wow, man, like we are jumping right into this.
Right in.
I was like, hold on a sec. Can I pause this and go like get ready? Because I was not, it's like jumping into the second act almost, but I appreciated it. I really did. I was like, let's just get going.
Yeah. 100%, because what we really want, and I think Gary Shore knew it, like we want to see Dracula be a vampire. So let's just not waste time. Initially, I thought Broken Tooth Mountain was a silly name for the mountain. It's sort of like, you know, Mount Doom, but it turns out like there is a Broken Tooth Mountain in Alaska. So there is a real one.
Well, so like, yeah, from time to time I was like, that's kind of antiquated, but then I was like, oh well, it is like a long ass time ago, so like what else would they call it? Probably something, you know, that would sound a little strange to us nowadays. But at the end of the movie, Vlad's gonna use a very contemporary line when he tells someone that he's gonna see them in the history books or something like that, or no, he's going to make sure that like history books don't remember. I forget, do you remember how he phrases that? He uses some kind of line at the end of the movie that was like, that's something they say today.
They head up to Broken Tooth Mountain expecting to find Turkish soldiers, but instead they find a terrifying beast. I like this sequence. We mentioned it before, the sort of echolocation, sort of predator vision. I really enjoy that. But basically, by the end of that scene, this vampire has killed the two men Vlad was with. Vlad manages to escape by the skin of his teeth because his sword reflects the sunlight.
Yeah, I like this sequence too. It's giving us information like that, you know, like it's showing us like with the sun that the guy can't get out of the cave. I like this idea. Like it reminds me a lot of the werewolf lore where a guy goes up a mountain into a cave and gets bitten by some kind of like hybrid creature. Like I'm feeling it here. You know, they mentioned that in the Wolfman where, you know, the dad was like, and I went up the mountain and I got bit by the Beast Boy.
Yep.
Like it's very similar. Like that's kind of nice. Like this poetry, it sort of rhymes. It's a cool action sequence. Like it's quick.
It's like I said, it's more an action movie than it is a horror movie, but like this is the one legitimate horror sequence. I mean, they walk into this cave, the floor is covered in crushed bone, and then you got this monster that you only catch like little flashes of. It's very well done, this scene. I thought this was a really effective way to introduce our vampire. Having descended from Broken Tooth Mountain, Vlad is meeting with Brother Lucian, who is a monk at the nearby monastery. Brother Lucian knows all about what this thing is. He's got this book that explains what a vampire is. Like they're like these mythological creatures. Story goes that a man years ago made a deal with the devil for immortality, and in exchange he wasn't able to go out in the sunlight and he thirsted for human blood, essentially what we know as a vampire. That was the price he paid for unnatural long life.
Yeah, it's great. I love when the movie is sort of prepared, like the people in it, like they have this library and they're going through all the books and they're like, here it is, and they whip it down and they're like, Los Vampire, you know, Nosferatu.
Yeah, I wish Brother Lucian had used the Nosferatu word, but he doesn't.
No, I know he doesn't, but I'm just saying, like, you know, we got it again with the most recent werewolf movie,
Yes.
The Wolfman film, where he's like, I am a lycanthrope. Like, that is the scientific explanation. It's cool. It's just, I mean, it's better for me. Like as a viewer, I'm always better for me when the world I'm watching is already somewhat aware of what's going on than it is to be like, we got to name this thing. Like, what do we call it? I don't know. Well, it's kind of cool. Like they put the word to, you know, they're like, here, we're going to break down like the etymology of his name. and everything. So I don't know. I like those scenes.
I like this sequence quite a bit. And I also like that it sets up the sort of unique turn that I think this story takes, which is that he is basically waiting for another to set him free, that vampire. He's like waiting up in that mountain.
That guy specifically is like bound to that mountaintop. Like he even if he wanted to at night, he can't step foot out of there.
Right, which this I think is a problem with the movie overall. We can talk about it later. Vlad has no such restriction. So I'm wondering why the master vampire is sort of chained to the mountain and Vlad isn't.
Okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean? They both have the same affliction, but they don't really explain why Vlad is able to move around at will at night, of course, but the master vampire is stuck inside the mountain.
I think he just made the worst deal, like, of the two. And I think now he's like, I'll make this deal nice and juicy. It's like, I know what happened to me, so I'm not going to let that happen to you. Just get me out of here, and I'll give you what you want.
If we want to operate on the idea that this master vampire was Caligula or somebody similar, Caligula died in 41 AD.
Oh, damn. So he's like 1,000.
He's like 1400 years old.
That's almost too old,
Right.
It's a good thing they didn't do that. I just can't get my head around the Caligula thing.
Knowing the truth of what lives up in that mountain, Vlad decides he's going to keep that a secret, as his people already live in too much fear of the Turks. And then we get a nice scene introducing his wife and his son. Pretty much shows Dracula is a family man. He's a good dad, good husband. Not much more to it than that.
He's got loyal subjects. He's got good friends at his table. The one thing that'll be pointed out very soon is that he has no army. I guess he wouldn't need an army because he's under the protection of the Turks. So he thinks.
Right.
We were also talking in some of those Scorpion King movies about how small kingdoms feel. And here's a dude that doesn't have much of a kingdom, but it still feels big because at least he's got two castles. He goes from the main castle, and then they do their little two towers walk over to the second castle, most of them for protection later, or whatever it is. Not so much a castle, it's like a fort.
It's similar to the old Frankenstein dynamic, where Frankenstein was a baron who was kind of the governor of this region.
Yeah.
So he didn't have his own army, but he was in charge of ruling this territory.
Yeah. So it's almost not even his. It's just you're in charge. You're managing all my property.
Right. So Easter Sunday, Vlad has a big Easter Sunday dinner at his castle. We learn a couple things. It's been 10 years since Vlad returned to Transylvania from fighting in the Ottoman army, which is cool. So it's been 10 years of peace. Everyone's pretty happy. But then, of course, the Turks crash that party. They have come looking for their missing men. They have also come to collect 1,000 young boys for the Janissary Corps, which supposedly had been done away with years ago.
Yeah. Plus, I don't know that we got 1,000 kids in this castle.
It's 10 years and older. There's definitely some teens in there.
It's weird that they would even want these kids yet. I'd be maybe to brainwash them and indoctrinate them easier when they're younger and blindfold them. We'll come to find out there's a blindfolded army, which makes no sense whatsoever. Maybe that's just the logic they're working under over there in Turkey at the time.
Tense scene, tense situation for Vlad.
Got to do it. He had to go through it.
He was clearly not prepared for the reinstitution of this draft, more or less. So Marina mentions that he and Mehmed had been like brothers when they were younger, and maybe if Vlad goes and asks for mercy, he might grant it. Mehmed might grant it. But no dice. Mehmed's a total prick about it.
Yeah.
And not only wants his 1,000 boys, but he wants Vlad's son as well.
This is kind of cool setup and foreshadowing, I thought. He has the bounty, he's you've come for your money. He's no problem. Here's all the silver with my face on it.
Right, that's right. He's expecting the tribute to be money, not boys.
Not boys. Dude, Dominic Cooper, you're being really creepy with your little boy talk. It's really freaking me out. But I thought the movie was trying to do something where they're setting up silver and gold.
Right.
Where Dracula was silver because he had all the silver money, but he also had silver armor and all that. And Dominic Cooper was kind of golden child, golden boy, and he had the gold armor and all that. And then later, he's actually going to use this tribute money to fight Dracula.
Yes.
Which is wild.
I do kind of love that. I thought that was a fun final scene for the two of them.
It worked as much as it felt like they forced it in there. Like, you got to figure out how he's going to kill him with money.
I see what you're saying, and I agree to a degree. I do think it ultimately works. It's a fun visual, some visual symmetry going on there. Now Vlad owes 1,000 boys plus his own son, and then this scene here where the exchange is supposed to take place. This is specifically where Gary Shore was sort of inspired by Once Upon a Time in the West. This whole sequence.
Yeah, it's shot very flat and like a standoff.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's like several standoff sequences I feel in this movie.
Yeah, I really like this scene. I mean, Vlad's really between a rock and a hard place. His wife is like, "You promised me we'd never give up our son."
But his son is like, "I'll do it because you did it."
There's that scene earlier on where we meet Ingress. This is after the Easter Sunday dinner.
And he's like, "Were you afraid? Were you scared, Daddy? Were you afraid? Were you?"
He's learning about that tradition and how Vlad went willingly to make his dad proud.
He's like, "I went and I became the baddest badass in the land, and that's why they're messing with me now because I'm such a badass."
Ingress definitely wants to make his dad proud. So in the moment, Vlad goes to make the exchange, and at the last second, the man who's there to receive Ingress says some shit. He talks some shit in the final moment.
He had to open his stupid mouth, you know?
He's like, "I thought you would have given more resistance."
And he's like, "So much for the scary Vlad the Impaler, bitch."
At which point, Vlad cuts his hands off and then sends Ingress running back to his mother.
That was awesome, man. Like, the movie isn't pulling many punches, which is a bit surprising. I mean, they don't drop an F-bomb at all. They could have definitely used one where he's like, "He's fucking bats." I think they go pretty far with the violence, to be honest. Like, maybe it's cartoon violence, but like, it's Itchy and Scratchy is still violent.
This is a really well executed sequence. I love how quickly everything happens. Like, this is the scene where we really get the sense of how skilled Vlad is as a fighter. He's very quick. You want to talk about Westerns, like this is his quick draw moment in the gunfight. It's awesome. But of course, he knows the consequences of this scene, his actions, is going to be that Mehmed II is now going to bring all of the forces of the Ottoman Empire down upon the people of Transylvania.
Oh, yeah. He's opened the door to hell. Like, basically, he knows like it's coming. But this is also very Western, where it's like, all right, now I got to go find help to defend my town.
Yes.
I got to go get a hero to like protect us. And like, now it just so happens he's going to become that guy.
He's going to become the hero. Yeah. So desperate for a solution. Like, he acted without thinking. And now he's got to figure out a way out of this mess. And he climbs back up Broken Tooth Mountain. Like, it's such an impractical moment. Like, it's so unrealistic to conceive of Vlad scaling the mountain the way he does. But the shot is so fucking awesome of him just like climbing, and the cape is waving behind him. He looks like Superman. It's one of those moments where they did it just because it looks cool, and I'm totally fine with it.
I'm fine with that. Yeah, I can't remember if there's more than one way up that mountain.
There has to be.
There has to be, right?
He took the hardest route up to that cave. It was like Bruce Wayne climbing up for the blue flower, you know?
That's it, man. It's symbolic. It may not be practical, but it represents his struggle.
Yes.
Okay. So therefore, it's still working for me.
I love it, but like, I had to point out that, like, why wouldn't he just take the path up the mountain instead of climbing?
You know what's fun about the cape is that it's appropriate for like the dude around this time to be wearing a cool cape if he's like in this position of power. So, you know, Dracula's got his cape.
Now we get a really great scene. Luke Evans versus Charles Dance in this complete act off, right? Like, they are both just holding their own against each other, which I think is the bigger ask for Luke Evans. He's the younger guy on the scene.
Charles Dance is very giving, you know, because like I was watching it going like, oh, he's kind of doing an understated thing because he's like super patient and then or whatever. Like, he's, you know, he may be anxious to get out of there, but he knows that this is part of a process. But he could be like pacing around the room and like waving his arms as the master vampire and like doing weird things, but he's just kind of standing there telling it like it is. And I like that. I mean, it's a bit of like an architect quote unquote scene from like the Matrix or whatever, where it's just like a big info dump, but it's well done. It's a well done exposition.
He's almost trying to talk Vlad out of it, which is kind of interesting. The point of this scene is that Vlad is going to go and seek the power of that vampire. I love that moment when the master vampire, he's like, everyone comes in here, they reek of fear, but you reek of hope. You know, why would someone crawl into their own grave looking for salvation?
He also has that line where he's like, no one's ever come back. And he's like, has anyone ever made it out before? He's like,
Yeah, and I love Vlad's whole justification. He says, I'm quoting here, men do not fear swords, they feared monsters. And sometimes the world doesn't need another hero. Sometimes what it needs is a monster.
I like how he's also simultaneously like offering this thing and like washing his hands of it, being like, I'm letting you know this is kind of like a monkey paw deal here.
Yes, 100%.
So I could like sleep okay, but I'm still letting you have it if you want it, but it's not my fault.
We'll break down the deal here. Vlad will be given the powers of a vampire, and once he has that, he will begin to thirst for human blood. And if he can resist that for 3 days, he will become human again. But if not, if he does feed, he will stay a vampire forever.
And Charles Dance will be able to dance his way out of that cave.
The deal would also allow our master vampire, it would provide him freedom to leave the cave and exact revenge on those who wronged him so many years ago.
Which, let's just put this in a certain perspective. If this were Caligula,
yeah,
wouldn't they all be dead by now? What's he gonna do? Go and find their ancestors and like sodomize them to death? What's his revenge?
My only assumption was that he would seek revenge on the ancestors of whoever.
Which in Caligula's case, I think were wiped out. I think that entire line, there's a good chance those family names have died out.
Yeah, it's something we'll never know because they never got farther than one movie.
Hey, at least he's out of the cave.
Then, of course, he also plans to use Vlad as his pawn in a, quote, immortal game of revenge.
All right. Let the game begin.
Yeah, that's where he first says it. And, of course, he will say it the final line of the movie.
One would imagine he's going to say it in the sequel that never happened too, several times.
So Vlad accepts the deal. He drinks the blood of the master vampire.
From a skull. Skull cup.
Yes. And he wakes up in the river, kind of like a hangover, right? Like he just wakes up out in the river.
Like a rebirth too, like some kind of satanic baptism, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, not unlike that for sure. He is now suddenly vulnerable to silver. The ring on his finger starts to burn.
His wedding ring.
And then we get like a really quick, but this might be the fastest, oh, hey, I have superpowers sequence I've ever seen. Like very quickly.
Man of Steel montage in a matter of seconds.
Very quickly, we establish that he's got superhuman hearing.
Because he hears the spider weaving the web.
Yes.
And it sounds like metal clashing.
He can see into space.
That was very cool. That was gorgeous.
He's got his healing factor, of course.
Which he trips over a rock and like cuts his hand. Right? He like goes to brace himself and then he cuts his hand on the rock.
But it heals. And he crushes the rock. So he's got superhuman strength and healing.
So strength and healing in one. Oh, this is efficient storytelling.
And his echolocation.
And then the coup de grace, my friend, is that he starts running.
Yes.
And explodes into a big pile of bats. And I'm going, what?
He hears an attacking army outside of his castle walls, like through the forest. And so that's why he's running. But yeah, he turns into a swarm of bats.
Which at first I was like, that's cool. But then I was like, he's going to always do that. I don't know if that was the best choice. I just have too many questions. Like, what if one of the bats dies? Does he lose a foot? Other things like why can't he just fly? Like let him just fly,
right,
or like split into multiple shadow versions, or do the mist thing, like have him roll over the entire army with mist. I just wish they didn't go like all in on the exploding into bats every time I'm getting too fast.
Yes, considering what we know about other Draculas, he could turn into a wolf, he could turn into a mist, like you said. He could turn into, like we've seen Gary Oldman's Dracula turn into like a big pile of rats. There are all these different things that he could turn into, and this movie only really utilizes bats.
It feels like a note from high upon, handed down as a mandate. My theory is they read the amazingly orchestrated and like very well done sequence towards the end where he orchestrates the bats into the hand and fist. Like that's really cool. And then they're probably like more bats. And the guy's like, that's all the bats. You know, like they're all there. And they're like, whoa, what if he turned into bats? And he's like, you mean turns into a bat? And they're like, no, like
many
like
bats.
50. It's just something I kind of wish was a little different. I got to get used to the rest of the movie.
I will say, like we've already sort of talked about it, it does look really cool. When you consider that this is a 90-minute movie, there's all these things he could do. That they keep going back to the bat well. He could have run back to the castle as a wolf. He could have done it any number of ways. I would have loved to have seen a mist kind of sequence.
Yeah.
But we just get bats. Still looks really cool, though.
Yeah.
And then so Vlad returns to the castle, and essentially it's just one man. It's him against that entire army. He basically tells everyone to hole up in the castle. I'm going to figure this out. And he tears everybody up. It's one of the coolest sequences. I really love the way it's shot. I do love specifically towards the end of it where the camera lingers on that sword. It's like sort of slow motion flying through the air, and we get the reflection of what's happening, which was a cool way to show the fight happening that's different from other things I've seen without just having repetitive kills, I guess.
Yeah, I gotta go rewatch this sequence because I don't know if it's set up in this particular way, but by the end of it, towards the end of the sequence, it turns into like a point of view of one of the soldiers, and Dracula attacks him. And like as the point of view guys like fall into the ground with a freaking sword sticking out of him, he's watching Dracula like slay all the dudes around him through the reflection of the sword, and then Dracula comes up and draws it out of his dying body, and the shot ends with him like closing his eyes to die or something.
Yeah, that's the scene I'm talking about. I forgot that it was like sticking into a man. Yeah.
There's tons of fun gags in this movie for sure, and I would believe that he could just plow through a field of dudes. You know, it almost reminded me of one of these video games I used to play. I can't quite remember the name, but you're just like one guy with a giant sort of Final Fantasy sized sword just plowing through like millions of soldiers.
You want to talk video games? This kind of reminds me of like when I would play Assassin's Creed. You know, once I got really proficient at the combat mechanics, I would just run around town picking fights and creating these mobs, right? Just so I could take out a whole group of dudes. And it very much feels like that. I think you're spot on.
And it's got a bit of the Neo Matrix kind of thing going on within the context of the character. Like it kind of fits.
And I love the gag at the very end when he comes back out of the battlefield and his men, you know, they find him and he just says, negotiations failed.
Is this the first time or is it another time where he impales these guys?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, right. And Dominic Cooper sees it, right? It's like he's got a message for you. And he's like, I'm thinking to myself, when did he have time? Is this what the rest of the guys did? He's like, all right, everybody, I killed him. You put him up on pikes and then we'll all have lunch.
After this scene, Vlad knows that he can't keep his people safe in that castle. So he decides to send everyone to the secluded monastery to keep them safe.
Yes, not Helm's Deep.
Not Helm's Deep. You know, this is up on top of a cliff. We get to Mehmed arriving at Castle Dracula, but before that is when, along that journey to the monastery, Vlad begins to feel that craving for blood. Like he can't even make love to his wife without almost turning into that monster.
So is this when he goes out in the middle of the night?
Yeah.
And bumps into not Renfield?
Not Renfield, yes.
This was amazing. I love this scene.
Not Renfield is an actor, Zach McGowan. He's playing the character
Schligum?
I cannot pronounce it.
Schlim?
He is like a mysterious Romani character. He is also with Vlad in the first scene when they discover the Turkish soldier's helmet.
Oh, okay.
It's in that scene also, but in this scene, he is basically Renfield, willing to provide him his own blood so that he can drink of it and become immortal.
I couldn't believe this was PG-13 too, because he like slits his wrists and pours it into a goblet and he hands it to him. He's like, I got some blood. He's like, I know all about this. He's like, come on, man. You know, you want it, master.
He calls him master,
Doesn't it feel good when I call you master?
Keep that actor in the back of your mind. I meant to mention him earlier. So Zach McGowan is not only in this, but he will become a Scorpion King.
No.
Yes.
No way.
He will become a Scorpion King eventually. So we will talk more about him when we get to that.
You know what? Good for him. Good for him. And I guess, you know, technically Dracula met the Scorpion King.
He did.
So I'm happy.
It's canon right here.
By way of the podcast. Head canon.
Mehmed finally arrives to Castle Dracula. There has been one survivor left to basically tell the story. And when Mehmed finds him, he's basically relayed the message to enjoy the view. And he looks up, and all of his men have been impaled along this field. It's much like the imagery we saw in the prologue of the film.
It feels like the Bram Stoker stuff from Coppola.
Yep.
Yeah, it feels like that.
He's back to being Vlad the Impaler again, or Lord Impaler, as they refer to him several times.
And they also, when they talk of Dracula and House of Dracula, he always has to correct them. They're like, oh, House of the Devil? He's like, no. House of the Dragon.
House of the Dragon. At this point, this is when Marina learns the truth about Vlad. That they wake up one morning in their tent. He's reacting to the silver wedding ring.
He's burning his silver. Yeah.
His scars are gone. In that opening sequence with the whole family, he takes a bath and he's covered in scars. Now his scars are gone.
He has Batman back.
He does have Batman back.
I thought of Bruce Wayne immediately, like that famous Alex Ross painting.
He comes clean about everything, and Marina, rather than be horrified, she gets it.
I think because it's not permanent yet.
Right. I mean, he explains that he just has to make it 3 days without feeding on blood.
3 days? Okay, it's already been a day and a half tops. Let's call it 2 days. Why not? We only got 1 day to go.
What she sees is that, the lengths to which he is willing to go to save or protect his family and protect his people. And I think that's the right view on that.
Because one lucky swing and a dude could take his head off on the battlefield. Sure. One guy with his composure who hasn't defecated in his pants out of fear yet and can manage to move a little bit. One good swing and he could theoretically get taken out,
right.
So it's still not foolproof.
So the next day, since Vlad cannot go out in the daylight, Marina covers for him. She mentions that he has already left. He's spying on Mehmed's army, I believe. I think this is his excuse. She is to go with the rest of them and continue on toward the monastery. And then that night, the Turkish army, the Turkish soldiers ambush the group. And then Vlad, as the sun goes down, the second it goes behind the mountain, he bursts out of that tent and just runs a train on these dudes as well. It's also very cool.
Yeah, he loses one of his best men.
Yes.
Who's protecting his wife and son. He arrives just in the nick of time before they are going to slay his wife or push her off a cliff. Not yet. Soon. Kind of is a repeat of the original battle, but shorter in a way. And this is where I felt like he could have turned into something else. I was just a little oh, we're going to do more bats. All right. Again, I'm just worried that one of those bats are going to die and he's not going to have a hand anymore.
Yeah, this could have been a scene where instead of bats, they do some other thing, right? But, like we keep saying, it does work.
They could have given him mind control, right? At times,
oh, yeah.
Some influence. Had them fight themselves or something that could have been interesting.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's definitely one of those vampire abilities they completely ignore in this movie. But that would have been a cool way to do it.
Yeah.
The next day they arrive at the monastery. Brother Lucian clocks him immediately.
Oh, dude.
He knows.
It's so funny. Dracula and his men are walking out of part of the castle or whatever, the monastery, and it's daytime. And he's about to walk into the sun and he's whoop. And he takes a step back and he lets all of his buddies by. He's you go, no, you go, no, you go. And this dude sees him and he's what's up with that? What the hell? Why isn't he going into the sun? And he follows him. And Dracula's staying in the shadows and hugging the wall and all this stuff. And this guy pops on him. He's you did it, didn't you? You dumbass. He's how could you?
Yeah, Brother Lucian totally blows his cover. He rips open the curtain, tries to destroy Vlad.
Don't they firebomb him? He rouses a mob. He's this is the guy. He freaking did the deal with the devil thing. He's I told him not to. And they're angry mob, angry mob.
Yeah, they try to burn him alive. And he snaps. He's suddenly you guys are ungrateful, everything I've done for you, and this is the thanks I get. His son watches him lose his mind.
Totally valid, Vlad.
Sure.
Totally Vladed. It's not fair. It isn't. No. And they don't know, but that's the price. That's part of the monster deal.
No, and Brother Lucian does not let this go. We'll just note that because it'll come into play later.
But he says stuff he's the silver, the sunlight, he's doing the list. He's maybe not the cross, but they never get into the holy water with this.
Now Vlad is down to his last day. All he has to do is make it through this day.
And he's hurting because they've torched him and stuff. And he's been fighting and everything. It's not like he's been sitting around all day. I don't know if they got into he hasn't been eating human food either.
Right. There's a scene right after that where Ingress brings him bread and, thinks his dad is sick. And he doesn't eat the bread. He splits it. Ingress is eating his half, and Vlad never touches his bread. Yeah, they do establish that, he can't really eat food in a weird sort of sly way. The following scene, the Ottoman army arrives. It is like the entire forces of this Ottoman army. They're blindfolded.
Dude, that is so bizarre. Yeah, it's like at a Dune or something. Like Dominic Cooper has a sequence earlier where he's like, "You didn't think I could teach you to fight blindfolded, but here we are." And it's like, "You're my blind army." And I'm just like, what is the benefit?
Well, the idea is that if they can't see what they're going to fight, there's nothing to be afraid of.
Well, okay, but like they could hit each other.
Sure.
They don't know what they're fighting. Like I would much rather see it and be able to run from it, or like get a lucky shot in or something. And if it's just a swarm of bats, I got to be honest. At first, I'm thinking I've seen worse, at first. And then I'm like, all right, that's too many. And then it's like, oh, now they're forming a giant fist. Okay. This is getting worse. There were like, blind swordsmen and blind assassins, but like I could never imagine like an entire army being able to fight in unison like this.
So I don't know if there's any basis in truth with that, or if it was just something they thought would look cool. There's quite a few nuggets of truth in this story they drew from. The real Vlad did serve as a soldier for the Ottoman army. He was given by his father as like a peace offering, and then returned. And Mehmed II was also like one of his enemies. So the whole being raised like brothers thing, I'm sure, is all just for the story. But there are places in this movie where they're really drawing from actual real stuff. And obviously a lot of it is fabricated. This particular detail, I don't know. I didn't even think to consider looking it up. It does seem strange that you would blindfold your army.
Because you know what I would expect at this point? Like, I mean, I know I hate when we do this, but it is always kind of fun when we start like, inserting what would be cool here, but give us a monster. Sure. Bring out a troll or like a creature or something, or like a giant scorpion, like ride that. Speaking of like Clash of the Titans that was going on around this time, like I almost feel like if they at one point were going to do the Baba Yaga, at this point they could be like, all right, we got a blind army, but we also have like 3 monsters coming with us too. Like one's in the air, one's on the ground, and like the other one is sort of, I don't know.
Or like elephants. Even something like a big elephant would be
cool. Yeah. Like let's ride in on eagles or something.
This is like the third big fight sequence. This is the biggest of the fight scenes. This is, of course, the one with the big bat fist. This is maybe my favorite fight scene. Just the scale of it is so impressive. I love the bat fist.
Yeah, dude, the bat fist, the hand, him conducting the bats up there like an orchestra, like, it definitely calls back to The Mummy.
Yep.
Right, the sand mouth and the water mouth. It calls back to, using the elements to create a body part to attack with. But the fist thing reads so well.
Yeah.
When it forms and changes, and the way that the movements with the bats and all that. Like, this is my favorite bat stuff too. And it's just like, there's so much here. This really could have been it, and I would have been happy.
And speaking of superheroes, this kind of reminded me of some shit that like Ant-Man could do with ants.
Yeah.
This battle is a diversion, we learn. So while Vlad is preoccupied with this giant army, a couple Turkish soldiers sneak into the monastery, and this is where they kidnap Ingress.
Yes.
And it is where Marina falls from that tower.
Yes. He comes in too late. They reach for each other as she is falling. Dracula's not fast enough.
He's not fast enough.
She, it's quite the Gwen Stacy, I must say again. It's the best way to put it. Yeah. Just out of reach.
Right.
Very tragic.
But she gives up her life force so that Vlad can save their son and save his people.
He drinks her blood, or he tries to change her?
He drinks her blood.
That's it? That's the deal?
Yep.
That's nice that it was her.
The sun was just about to come up on the 4th day, I guess, or whatever. And he bit her, drank her blood. And then basically the sun goes away. The clouds come back. It becomes like a thunderstorm. And then Vlad rolls in like Thor.
He controls the weather now. Right. Yeah. He's leveled up now that he's full Dracula. He goes and he grabs his armor. He's like, earlier in the movie, his son's like, Dad, what's behind that door? He's like, we never go behind that door. Never ask me again. Just forget it. Put it out of your mind. And then after this happens, he's like, I'm going to open the door. And he opens it, and it's got his old armor. And he's like, still fits. Let's kick some ass.
And then it's just straight up find Mehmed, kill all the Turks, get his son back.
And then this one turn of events.
Yes. So what he does is he finds survivors, his own people.
Yes.
And he's like, do you guys want revenge? And they all say yeah. So he feeds them his blood, turning them all into vampires.
He creates a brood.
Yes. And so now Vlad and his vampire army just lay waste to the remaining Turks.
Which, if I may say, when the Turks are like waiting and they're like, this is going to be easy, this is going to be so cool. Like, we're just going to wipe the floor. He's got nothing left. And the storm comes.
Yes.
And then like they're in the storm. Like you see them almost like that movie Chronicle when they're flying through the storm and stuff. And, and I'm thinking to myself, like, cool, they're not all going to explode into bats, but they do. They all exploded. What if they got mixed up and they got their bats mixed? Could you be a half and half?
Oh my God.
My one gripe with the whole movie.
It suddenly becomes a Cronenberg movie where you got like two people fused together because their bats got mixed up.
It just would look so cool when you saw all those silhouettes for a minute when the lightning flashed.
Yeah.
That I just wanted them all to swoop down in unison like fighter jets or something together, doing their Viltrumite Superman pose like in unison, but no.
So while the other vampires are basically getting their revenge on the Turks, Vlad heads straight for Mehmed's tent.
Oh, question. So these vampires that he created, they aren't killing people with swords and stuff. They're biting people and draining them. So does that mean that whatever deal he made, like they don't have 3 days, like they changed and they're going to be like this for good, right? Because at least after the battle, when they're drinking people on the field.
Yeah.
And things, so
I don't know about the vampire rules at play here.
Yeah, he never explained his deal. He's just like, who wants to be a vampire?
Right. Because like creating a vampire is what the master vampire had to do in order to free himself, right? He created Vlad. Now Vlad is committed to being a vampire. He creates some vampires, and yet he doesn't benefit from the same condition. You know what I mean? Like, it's a little bit confusing. It's not totally explained at all, really. But
he's not thinking rationally here either.
No,
he's like,
he's
we gotta hurry up and finish this.
Pure revenge. As we'll find out, none of those vampires live long enough for the rules to matter, I guess.
Yeah, they don't live long and prosper at all.
No. So Vlad heads for Mehmed's tent, and like you mentioned before, he's basically created this trap with all of Vlad's silver, all of his money, which he is now vulnerable to.
Which is kind of a cool metaphor, I guess.
I think so.
Right? You're going to be killed with the weight of like your own greed or whatever.
Money with his own face on it.
That's kind of fun. I like the way the camera looks too when it's like too shiny for him to see straight. Like that's nice.
Yeah.
I just thought he'd put on silver armor too, but he's wearing his gold threads.
Yep.
This is fun enough. I like that the son is watching. Son of Dracula sees all this go down.
Yep.
He's slipping and falling on the money.
It's a pretty well executed scene, a little bit of monologuing as you would get from any supervillain. Vlad, of course, wins the fight, but I really love how that scene wraps up. Like he's about to get staked. And last second is able to like turn the tables. I think he corrects Mehmed in that moment. Like Mehmed refers to him as like son of the dragon, and Vlad then embraces the son of the devil moniker, which I think is pretty cool.
Question quickly, because he says like, I'm gonna drive a stake through your heart, and he's like, it would kill you even if you were a normal man. He does that whole line, like a stake through the heart kills anybody, no matter if they're a vampire or not.
Right.
But then he's like driving the stake, he's trying to drive it through his armor,
right,
first of all.
Yep.
But then the armor is like flaking away because of the wood of this. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Part? It's like, what?
It almost gives way to the wood.
I don't understand why that would happen. I'm giving it to the movie because it happens right here at the end, and I don't really have time to think about it until just now. But it is a little strange that he's like, I'm just going to take this normal piece of wood.
Yep.
And now you'll be impaled. How about that for irony?
Yeah, I do remember like his armor sort of yields to the wooden stake, right? I don't know. I think it's an interesting visual, but I don't know how much sense it really makes. I feel like that wood should still have to go through the armor.
Yeah, I wonder if it was intended to be against his chest and have like his chest kind of disappearing as he drove the stake closer and closer through it. And they were like, that's a little too R-rated.
Right.
Like maybe we should change that to an armor. No one's going to question it. The movie's almost over.
With Mehmed dead, Vlad gets his son back. But now the vampire army that he's created have decided being a vampire is too much fun to stop. And all the Turks are dead, and the only one left to turn is Ingress.
Which not necessarily true, because we find out the priest's still alive. We find out that Renfield's still out there. But these guys are like vampires for less than a day.
A few hours.
A few hours, yeah. They've already feasted, fought, had like this battle sequence and everything. And then they're going to turn to their leader, basically, and be like, here's what you need to do. And it's like, whoa. Like, slow down, guys. Like, you just became vampires. You think you can tell me what to do? And they're like, but if you kill your son, you'll be free. And he's like, no, like, you dumbass, like, now I'm free because my son's alive. Like, what? It's
Right.
like, it's so crazy how they're all not on the same page right now.
A few hours as vampires, and they've become the Lost Boys. That's basically what happens, and they're ready to become one big vampire family, which Vlad is not willing to do. Gives Ingress over to brother Lucian to keep him safe. At that moment, the clouds part. The sun reappears.
He conducts the clouds.
Yes, that's the implication. Yeah.
Well, I just like the idea that he is like a conductor of
the elements,
or of the natural forces.
So he accepts his own death, and all the other vampires die.
He looks freaking gnarly.
He does.
There was a cool shot of him earlier when he was burned,
Uh-huh.
and he looked like classic, what you would kind of consider classic vampire-ish. He becomes like translucent at times, and like he looks awesome here, I think, at the end too. And when he stakes his friend, and the guy like shrivels up on the stake, turns into like jerky, like that was wild.
Yeah, that was fun. He does fight a couple of them first, doesn't he? And then parts the clouds, sun comes out. They all die.
Including him. He tries to roast himself.
Yes. Ingress is then crowned the new Prince of Wallachia. Before the epilogue, Vlad is pulled out of the battlefield by that mysterious Romani, the not Renfield character. He has fed blood of his own, or he has fed the Romani's blood, I should say, and is brought back to life. And then the modern day epilogue, we jump forward. Vlad is wandering through this city. I think he's in London, and he meets a woman who looks like Marina, right? It's the same actor, but her name is Mina, and they sort of hint at that like sort of love across time, like she is literally the reincarnated Marina, because he recites a poem that it happens to be her favorite poem. As they walk off into the distance, we see the master vampire Charles Dance in modern clothing tapping his fingers on the table.
It's straight out of The Dark Knight. Is it The Dark Knight Returns when like Alfred
and Bruce see each other?
Bruce. Yeah, it's almost the same, except they don't see each other. But he looks over and he sees Dracula with the lady, and he's like nods approvingly, but then he stands up and he says his catchphrase,
"Let the games begin."
And the movie ends. What a weird thing to say when a movie's about to end. Let this begin. The end.
I mean, what's weirder is that they never followed up with a sequel. Like, what are we supposed to expect happens? I would love to know.
I've been promised movies that haven't shown up, before. Sure. And like, that wasn't necessarily like as much a surprise. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd have loved 4 straight to video sequels within this world. I'll still take them if they want to give them to me, but no, for what we got, like, I honestly, like, for what this is, for what they're trying to accomplish, they're not trying to make a horror movie here. They're making a action movie with some horror elements, with some scares, with some like supernatural stuff going on. But first and foremost, I think that you've hit on it early, and you were right that this is an action movie, and that is the genre. And for a monster action movie, it was fun. I did have a lot of fun watching this twice.
Yeah, it's a movie that I hadn't watched maybe since it came out on Blu-ray. I remember getting together with some friends and watching it with them and really enjoying it. I hadn't touched it since. I kind of, at a certain point, I started saving it for this. So it was nice to revisit. I watched it a handful of times this week as I was preparing for the show.
Yeah, as of this recording, it's on Netflix.
It is on Netflix, yep. It's a really good time. Like I said, it doesn't really match up with Bela Lugosi's Dracula or really any other Dracula that I can think of. This is like if Dracula was given like the superhero treatment, what you might get. And I do think that they do some really cool stuff with it within that framework.
If that's the sort of mashup of like, all right, take Dracula, take superheroes and slam it together, like you could get way worse. You could do way worse. Like I'd be so much more upset if he didn't even turn into bats once, and like I'd rather have him explode into bats like the whole movie than never. There's things in here I think that are really cool ideas. It just doesn't seem like they had the time or the money to do more, but I also don't feel like they needed to do much more. There really isn't much missing from this regarding like this type of version of this story, this genre of a Dracula story.
What makes it all work, right? By treating Dracula like a superhero kind of action hero character. What makes it work, in my opinion, I think, is the production design. It still looks like a horror movie, like a gothic horror movie. It looks like a Dracula movie.
Yeah, some really gorgeous shots, and this movie is really, really good to look at.
Yes, and like the fact that Gary Shore was inspired by westerns, like some of these shots look like western compositions. Yeah, I think that he drew inspiration from a lot of really cool places, and I think they all work, but it never really loses that gothic horror vibe, even when it is like an action movie. So I think he really found a way to blend those elements together in a way that doesn't feel forced. It does feel very organic for me. I am a big fan of Dracula Untold. I wish we had gotten some sequels, but this is all we're going to get, unfortunately.
Well, I'll take what we got.
That's going to wrap us up for this episode. But before we go, we do have some monster mail.
Oh.
So we got an email from listener Colby Oster. I have met Colby. He's a really nice guy.
Cool.
We have a mutual friend. Yeah, so he wrote to us saying, "Good afternoon. I've been a huge Universal Monsters fan, from owning all the movies to action figures. I'm even getting all friends to join in a Monster-thon this October. Any advice in starting chronologically like you, or just grab a series? From a huge fan, Colby." I'll let you think about that for a second, Mike. If I were to make a recommendation, I mean, I guess it depends on how much you're wanting to watch and how much time you have. You could do kind of like the first movie of each respective franchise, because I think that all of the first installments of everything are all bangers, right? They're all really good. But if you wanted to stick to like one franchise, quote unquote, I think Frankenstein is probably the strongest, because you got Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and Son of Frankenstein, which are all really strong. Ghost is just, it's a little bit lesser.
There is a ghost, though. The ghost does show up.
It gets a little batty at the end, and then Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. House of Frankenstein. You could just stick to the Frankenstein movies, but those are two different ways that I would go. It depends on the time you have to work with. But Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I like your idea of doing the first of each. Like, that's a really cool idea. Or what I would do, I don't know, this might be kind of nuts, is like put them in a randomizer and let fate decide.
Like all 32 or however many was.
Well, you know what? I would probably take one and be like, all right, let's do one that we all think like we want to watch, and then like let's put the rest in a blender. The first of each is a really cool idea, because you're right, like they all just start on the right foot. They just do, you know. Some get better, some get worse. They start out really good. So I would check those out. Yeah.
It is fun though. Like if the goal was to watch in chronological order and you want to watch something evolve, and like, so that was the fun of watching those movies in that order for me anyway, when we did it in our first season, is like watching how the quality changed over time. As we were learning about the studio and kind of where they were financially and why these movies sort of tapered off towards the end of each respective franchise through the 40s. There's a lot of like low budget stuff, recycled footage, all that. If you want to get that impression, what's the best franchise for that? Maybe The Mummy. The Mummy movies kind of really display just how fast and loose they were playing with these movies just to get them made and crank them out.
Yeah, it could be. Or The Invisible Man, just to show how like genre spanning they were, you know, just to show how much like how malleable like the characters could get and be. And that's
definitely the best of the characters, to show that just how flexible they are. Those are some good ways to do it.
I hope we didn't make it harder. If I had to do a specific thing, I'd say go with the first of each series and do those in chronological order, because you'll still get a good idea of how times they were changing.
There's a reason why the box sets usually just have like the first movie, like Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy. Although they do include Bride of Frankenstein, because it introduces the bride.
A little special.
It is a special movie, yeah. So you could just do that, and I think that would be a fun time. Colby, by any means, follow up. If we were able to help, I hope it's a good time. Okay, that's it for this episode. But don't worry, we will be back on Friday, August 30th to discuss The Scorpion King 4, Quest for Power.
I almost thought you were going to say Quest for Peace. That was a Superman 4.
Write to us if you like at themonstersthatmadeus@gmail.com. You can also follow us on X, aka Twitter, at MonsterMadePod. We're also on Blue Sky at MonsterMadePod and on Instagram and Facebook at The Monsters That Made Us. You can follow me pretty much anywhere online at Dan Colon. Mike, where can listeners find you?
You can follow me pretty much everywhere online at _Mikester, STIR, and all the other shows I'm on at cageclub.me.
If you enjoyed this episode and you want to support the show, you can become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/themonstersthatmadeus. Every dollar we make goes right back into the show, and it helps us keep doing more of this. You can also support the show by giving us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. And we can't forget about our t-shirts on TeePublic. You can find the link for that in our aforementioned Twitter and Instagram bios. For all other things Cage Club related, just head on over to cageclub.me. That's cageclub.me. Stay spooky, everybody.